So welcome to the 2020 debate for the 19th Middlesex House of Representatives seat. This district covers most of Tewksbury and most of Wilmington. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm the editor of the Wilmington Apple, and I'm the debate moderator. Our timekeeper is Lizzie Hill, reporter from the Tewksbury-Wilmington Town Crier. I'd like to acknowledge Tewksbury resident Lorna Gary for all her behind-the-scenes work in organizing tonight's event. This debate is being co-sponsored by the Tewksbury Republican Town Committee and Tewksbury Democratic Town Committee. This debate is being produced by Tewksbury Telemedia and simulcasted on Wilmington Community Television. It is airing live and will be aired on demand on both towns' local access TV channels, on the Town of Tewksbury's YouTube page, on Wilmington Community Television's Facebook page, and on WCTV.org. Just a disclaimer, due to COVID-19, we do not have much of an in-person audience. There are only 6 people inside the Tewksbury Town Hall auditorium, and everyone is practicing social distancing. Everyone is at least 14 feet apart. In consultation with the Tewksbury Board of Health, it was determined that candidates and myself are not required to wear masks during the debate, although some may choose to do so. Before we get started, I've been asked to briefly discuss how to vote in this race. And so there are 3 ways to vote: on election day, in-person early voting, and vote by mail. I'll touch on each briefly. Election day voting. The election day is Tuesday, November 3rd. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. In Tewksbury, voters will go to their regular polling locations. In Wilmington, on the other hand, there's a big change. All voters who vote on election day in Wilmington must vote at the Shriners Auditorium at 99 Fordham Road. Next is in-person early voting. Both towns are offering in-person early voting at their respective town halls beginning Saturday, October 17th through Friday, October 30th. Hours vary and are listed on both towns' websites, Tewksbury-ma.gov and wilmingtonma.gov. I think Tewksbury should look at getting rid of the hyphen in their website, but that's just me. And then finally, vote by mail. Links to vote by mail applications are available on both towns' websites. The last day to apply for a vote by mail ballot is Wednesday, October 28th. Mail-in ballots must be postmarked by November 3rd and received no later than 5 p.m. on November 6th. Voters who prefer not to mail their ballots may drop them off in the designated drop box or drop slot outside their town halls. And whichever way you choose to vote, if you're not already registered to vote, the last day to register in this election is Saturday, October 24th. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your community's town clerk office. Okay. So the candidates in the race are first-term incumbent David Robertson, a Democrat from Tewksbury, and challenger Alec DiFruscia, a Republican from Tewksbury. Tonight's debate will cover 9 topics. Questions were solicited from the general public and members of the Tewksbury Democratic and Republican town committees. The questions were ultimately selected by me and not shared with anyone else. In some instances, I have reworded some questions, and in most instances, I've added some background or context to the question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question, and then 1 minute for rebuttals if necessary. The debate will also consist of 3-minute opening statements and 3-minute closing statements from both candidates. And let's get to those opening statements now. So we had a coin flip moments ago, and Representative Dave Robertson is going to go first.
Thank you, Robert, for moderating this. And to the residents of Tewksbury and Wilmington, friends and supporters, good evening. For the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of serving the residents of Tewksbury and Wilmington as your state representative. You might have first met me during my time working as a legislative aide to our late friend, Representative Maselli. Or we might have met somewhere along the 2018 campaign trail, or perhaps seen me during this campaign trail doing our private silent door drops. Perhaps you called into my office sometime in the past 2 years. These past 2 years have been very successful, but with COVID hitting our community, they also have been a challenge. We met this challenge head on, though, and we continue to move forward to this day. Together, we've worked for better schools for our children. We have engaged in numerous civic efforts to better our parks and public spaces. We have come together at town meeting to make decisions that affect us all the most. Within the scope of my office, I am happy to say my first term has been a smashing success. We were able to work and secure land for Strongwater Farm at the State Hospital. Even before COVID, I was able to secure necessary funding to defend our first responders and provide them equipment, and since the outbreak, continue to assist them in our greatest time of need. I am happy to say there's new pavement here on Route 38, more destined in Tewksbury next year, and a project in Wilmington redesigning it at the moment, bringing essential upgrades to the Route 38 corridor. Community is what has held us together before and during this pandemic. Community is defined by commitment. Commitment to our neighbors, commitment to our shared goals of a better future, and a commitment to personal and shared progress. I remain committed to you as your representative for the 19th Middlesex. I have been an intern in the State House, a legislative aide, a chief of staff, and now your state representative. Some say that this has made me a career politician. In a way, I agree. I long ago made the decision, when I was about to graduate high school, to dedicate myself back to what these towns have given us and given me. I understood that my entire time through the Tewksbury school system, as a local scout, as a member of our baseball and basketball teams, everything was given to me without much asked in return. And that was a debt that I could not repay. Public service is not something to be chastised or ridiculed or made into a political football. Staying home and engaging with the people who raised me is the choice I made. And together, we have tackled real issues with real enthusiasm. We have had a strong first 2 years. And as your representative, come November 3rd, I know I'll return to make the next two only better. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative Robertson. And next up is the Republican challenger, Alec DiFruscia. Mr. DiFruscia.
Thank you, Robert. Representative Robertson, always a pleasure. My name is Alec DiFruscia, and I'm the Republican candidate for state representative here in Tewksbury and Wilmington. I'm running for state representative because I think the working families of Tewksbury and Wilmington have been left behind at the State House. When I was growing up, my parents taught me that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you will be successful. My dad was a Marine and my mom was a small business owner, and my parents focused on the dignity of hard work. Now we take a look at what's going on at the State House. We have radical leftists pushing to defund and kneecap our police officers. They're raising our taxes at every turn. Our small businesses have been crushed by COVID-19 with little to no relief in sight. All the while, they keep us out of the loop. We have one of the most notorious legislatures that operate behind closed doors and in the dark. As your state representative, I promise to stand up and back the blue every single day. I'll fight for small businesses and their chance at economic recovery. I will never vote to raise your taxes, and I will spearhead efforts to increase transparency and make government accountable to the voters and the taxpayers of Tewksbury and Wilmington. You know me. I'm from here. You've seen me in your neighborhoods. I've knocked on over 5,000 doors. I am a fighter, and I will continue to fight as your next state representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DiFruscia. We are going to move on now to the questions. There'll be 9 questions. The first 3 questions will involve topics that your campaigns have attacked each other on over the past few months. This will be exciting.
Yes, it will.
The first question deals with police reform.
Absolutely.
So, and I apologize. So the first question is going to go to Representative Robertson, and the response will go to Mr. DiFruscia.
Sure.
So last month, the Massachusetts Republican Party ran a digital ad with Representative Robertson's image and a scene from a riot that said the radical Democrats wanted to fund local police. Click here to defeat Rep. Dave Robertson. In response, the Robertson campaign purchased a full-page ad in the Town Crier that read, in part, "Dishonest GOP money pays for dishonest Facebook ads. Tewksbury GOP candidate pulls slanderous advertisements after shamelessly lying about Rep. Dave Robertson's position on first responders." So the question is, where do you stand on the defund the police movement, and specifically, what police reforms do you support? Representative Robertson, 2
Thank you.
minutes.
Absolutely, and I will take them. Well, it's funny. The rhetoric was already out of the gate with radical Democrats and left on the police reform, which must be odd considering the Mass Chiefs of Police, NEPBA, and PFFM all endorsed me. The Mass Corrections Officers, soon to be on the way, and they've been helping my campaign. When we had this discussion about national police reform, the first thing that came to my mind was how I've known the officers. It's kind of funny. When I go past the fire station, there's 6 gentlemen who I graduate the same year from high school with. These men and women who just months ago were heroes going into outbreak with COVID, the nursing homes, in the state hospital. These police officers going and picking people up off of Market Basket when they're having just reported cardio issues. Do we know it was COVID? No. Maybe. Needless to say, they went in all the same and served our community. So when we had the discussion about police reform, so I said to my colleagues, Wilmington and Tewksbury are bar none some of the best departments in the country. And they are certainly not Boston. Boston's not Baltimore. Baltimore's not New York. We need to look at what we do successfully. And that's where I came up with the phrase, we need to refund the police. Why are our police so successful? It's because their training standards are unrivaled. Each of those officers have had social workers on staff for years under former Chief Pagonis and Chief Sheehan. Our current chief, Columbus here in Tewksbury, and Mr. Desmond over in Wilmington, Chief Desmond, have continued this and expanded the program so that social workers follow up with issues that, while might be criminal in nature, most of the time aren't, such as panhandling, drug overdoses and such, and it's wildly successful. The state should be helping local departments reach that in other cities that can't afford to. Our training that our officers go through, whether it's autism awareness training so officers know when they come across a suspect that might have that challenge in front of them, whether it's crisis intervention training, they come across a schizophrenic who are perhaps not on their medication at the time. They do this annually, they do it biannually. We need to strive to make that the standard for the entire Commonwealth, and the state needs to refund local departments to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Representative Robertson. Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to commend Representative Robertson's campaign. For that ad, you picked an excellent picture of me. So, Dave, as always, thank you. In terms of police reform, I am 100% in favor of police reform. But what came through the Senate and what came through the House was done without input and behind closed doors. This is the problem at Beacon Hill. This is why I'm running. In the Senate, they held no public hearings. In the House, they had a public comment period. But the bottom line is, we need input from police. The House bill established a Standards and Training Commission. That Standards and Training Commission was made up of solely political appointees. If we are going to reform police, we need to make sure police officers have a say in that reform. In addition, we need to protect qualified immunity for our police officers. They answer those 911 calls. I don't think I could. They need to be protected, and they need to know that they can do their jobs without the fear or the threat of a lawsuit. In addition, we need to make sure we have reform in selection, training, and discipline of our officers. There needs to be a standard, not arbitration, for our police officers so that bad cops are held accountable. However, Mr. Robertson can say he has his endorsements from his special interest groups, but he refuses to stand up to the radical left mob that has overtaken the State House, that has voted for police reform. I will always combat the narrative that the left pushes, and I will always back the blue.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So we will have a 1-minute rebuttal, and within that 1-minute rebuttal for each candidate, I'd also like you to answer this question. This question comes from Stephen in Tewksbury, who specifically wants to know your position on body cameras with penalties for officers turning them off. So if you can incorporate body cameras into your response, Representative Robertson, 1 minute.
Absolutely. So I find it kind of confusing that claims that in the middle of a pandemic we have created the most accessible electronic commentary period, arguably easier than going into the State House, claim it's behind closed doors. And yeah, you know, it's funny, we do have to protect qualified immunity. I absolutely agree with you there. I stood up to what you keep painting as the radical left by voting on an amendment that would say if the police lost qualified immunity, I would lose qualified immunity. Lip service isn't public service here. I actually put my name on the line here, and I voted against it, which as a state representative is the most powerful thing you can do for your community. You pay us to take our ideas and put our votes and plans into action. When it comes to weeding out the bad officers, I had some great conversations, including with Representative Whalen, a Republican from out west who was a former state trooper. And we kicked around the idea of something coming up close to what the medical malpractice board looks like, where an officer, if they were accused of misconduct, would go before a judge. The judge in consultation takes a sanitized report, it's just the facts, and speaks with a board appointed of police officers and other folks, such as maybe from the Attorney General's office, to allow the case to proceed. As for turning off the body camera, I believe that the body camera should be on and an officer should always have their name tag. They put on that uniform with pride. The community needs to know who they are.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative Robertson. And Mr. DiFruscia, you have a minute.
Thank you. You know, when it comes time to making politically expedient votes, Mr. Robertson is really, really good at that. He knows he's up for re-election. He's not stupid. But the reality is there is a narrative, a hateful, nasty narrative that is being pushed by Democrats at the State House that needs to be stood up to. I will always back the blue. I am not afraid to back the blue, and I will always stand behind our men and women of law enforcement. When it comes time to body cameras, I absolutely believe that body cameras should be turned on. I believe that we need to provide our local departments with the adequate funding to ensure that police officers have those body cameras, and there should be penalties if they turn them off.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So we're going to move on to question 2. And the second question deals with the gas tax. And again, I'm going to be a little long-winded. I promise I won't be long-winded for most of these questions, but this is so good. I just have to set this up. So in August, Mr. DiFruscia posted the following to his campaign Facebook page. In November 2019, Rep. Dave Robertson came out against a gas tax increase, saying we shouldn't punish those just trying to survive. But on Friday night, Dave Robertson joined his Democrat colleagues and voted to pave the way for bureaucrats to levy new and higher gas, diesel, and carbon taxes without requiring a legislative vote. In response, and I love a good Facebook war, Rep. Robertson posted the following to his campaign Facebook page. Quote, it seems that certain candidates need a refresher course in basic legislation. Easy for me to say. The idea that the TCI, Transportation Climate Initiative, is a backdoor gas tax is at best a critical misunderstanding and at worst an attempt at misinformation when the truth matters the most, unquote. But then it gets even better. The Massachusetts Republican Party then ran a digital ad with Robertson's image that said, quote, the radical Democrats voted to increase the gas tax, sign this petition to defeat Rep. Robertson, unquote. And then the Robertson campaign responded, as they apparently do, by putting another large ad in the Town Crier that reads, in part, quote, GOP candidate lies again, false ad claims Dave voted to increase gas tax, Dave voted against it and secured millions in bonds to fix Route 38. So the question will go to Mr. DiFruscia first, who will have 2 minutes, is do you see yourself supporting any type of tax increase over the next 2 years? And specifically, do you support an increase in the gas tax to fund the state's transportation infrastructure? 2 minutes is yours.
No and no. In terms of the TCI, it absolutely is a gas tax hike. politicians at the State House will tell you this is a market-based compliance mechanism. That's fancy politician speak for, I'm going to raise your gas tax and give unelected bureaucrats the power to do it, and then throw my hands up when the price goes up and say, I didn't vote for a gas tax hike. Look, this is more of the same. This is what they do at the State House. They are constantly voting to raise our taxes. I will never, ever support a gas tax hike, and I will never support a tax hike to improve our infrastructure or our roads. You know, the MBTA has a massive budget, a massive pension liability in which the taxpayers have zero accountability over, and we want to give these people more money? The answer is no. Working families in Tewksbury and Wilmington have to stay within their means, and this TCI bill sets arbitrary climate goals and then gives unelected bureaucrats the power to raise our gas tax. Families are hurting. We're 17% unemployment rate. Small businesses have been shut down, and the legislature's solution is to throw their hands up and give bureaucrats the power to raise our gas tax? Give me a break. No way. I will never support a gas tax increase, and I will never support a tax increase, period.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Now, 2 minutes is yours, Representative
Thank you.
Robertson.
I appreciate it. That was verbatim from a special interest group, Mass Fiscal Alliance, the same group that says I voted for a gas tax, which, for those folks at home, can look up 4580, which was a gas tax. It says right there, the price on gasoline shall be raised 5.5. Diesel, I think, was something like 8.5. Aviation fuel, it's all right there. It's publicly available on the state website. And when you go to the roll call, you'll see a no. And then, pardon my French, I had the guts, well, that's a more friendly family word than I would use, to go into the speaker's office and ask him for almost $1.7 million to improve Route 38, unincorporated roads, and then a couple months later, a new train station for North Wilmington. Now we come down to what's known as the 2050 roadmap, which sets out Massachusetts decreasing pollution and emissions. You're right, there's something in there called market-based mechanisms. You know what those are? Well, my opponent would tell you it's a gas tax, which is a bit of a red herring. Things that we discussed, because I'm on both the Committee for Telecom and Utilities, but as well as the Environment and Natural Resources, are things like, let's see here, tax credits for those who want to buy electric vehicles, extending tax credits to businesses that want to build electric vehicle charging station, cap and trade for plants that burn trash. Not a gas tax on you. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you knew, taxes must start in the legislature. And I'd vote against it again, just like I did with H4580. It's that simple. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater and ignore that we're trying to give you cleaner air and a better MBTA seems naive. We're not going to be around forever. We're building a better Massachusetts. I'll always vote against a gas tax. I'll always have the guts to go in and ask for more for our road. Don't let them spin the words from a special interest group.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative Robertson. I'm not sure if you know what the phrase "pardon my French" means, but
I do,
okay.
and then I walked it back. It's the Boston side of me coming out here.
But so I will allow for 1 minute rebuttals, but I also wanted to ask a follow-up question that we can incorporate. And I have to choose between husband and wife. This is difficult, but I'm going to choose David's question. So, no, you know what? I'm going to choose Ruth's question. So Ruth from Tewksbury would like to know, the constitutional amendment on the graduated income tax is making its way through this legislature. Where do you stand on the graduated income tax? And this, for viewers at home, is sometimes referred to as the Millionaires Tax. I know that Mass Fiscal Alliance has done digital ads against Rep. Robertson on this issue in the past, and Rep. Robertson has called them scare tactics and misinformation. You're up first, though, Mr. DiFruscia. So 1 minute, and if you wanted to respond to anything that Rep. Robertson said, and then your thoughts on the Millionaires Tax.
Sure. Yeah. You know, it's easy to go into the speaker's office and ask for money when in your first year you voted with them 94% of the time. Look, Mr. Robertson is a creature of the Beacon Hill political machine. It's very easy to ask for money when the speaker says, go this way, he does. So, and I commend you on being able to get along down in Boston. In terms of the graduated income tax, I am absolutely opposed to the graduated income tax. You know, People aren't stupid. We've tried to push this proposal 5 or 6 times in the last 50 years, and that tax will only hike taxes on small businesses, and eventually that tax will work down to middle-income earners and low-income earners who simply cannot afford it. Our communities are getting more and more expensive by the day, and the only ideas coming out of Boston are more taxes.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. And Rep. Robertson, you have 1 minute.
He kind of spoiled my upcoming ad. The real number, Alec, is 83%, which makes me more independent than your friend, Mr. Lombardo, and that's from the Lowell Sun.
First year.
Let me finish, and that's correct. 83%. We're not looking at first year, we're looking at term, and to mislead the voters like that is shameful. As for the graduated income tax, the fair share amendment, the millionaires tax, depending on who's putting money in your pocket, is a ballot question. Now, it was refuted by the courts simply over language. They would say anyone that earns $1 million a year, that's $83,000 a month, would have a surtax, and it was meant to go to the ballot. I don't care if it's to drop the M off the name Massachusetts. If a petition with 150,000 signatures from across this Commonwealth comes into the State House, I put the trust in the people that put their trust in me to vote on it. And this would go to our roads and bridges and schools. I also broke, and then this is in the first year for you keeping count at home, that if this was to indeed pass by the voters, to roll back the gas tax, the tax on S Corps, which are our small businesses, and those earning under $100,000 a year, which is the vast majority. There's 31 people potentially in Tewksbury and Wilmington that surtax might affect. The rest of us would all be getting a cheaper, lower tax break, which I believe is something that you're aiming to do. But what I do is simply ensure that our teachers, police, and fire don't see cuts because of a decrease in state revenue while we make it more fair and equitable for the working folks.
We're going to move on to the third question, and I think we can get back to this topic if you feel you need to in a future question. So the third question deals with illegal immigration, and Representative Robertson will answer first, followed by Mr. DiFruscia. And again, I'm going to be long-winded, and I promise this is the last time. This is my favorite. So in December, State Rep Robertson submitted an op-ed to several local media reaffirming his stance that he opposes driver's license for illegal immigrants. In response, Mr. DiFruscia issued a statement that read, in part, "As soon as I entered the race, I immediately called on the legislature to stop driver's license for illegal immigrants. Representative Robertson was silent until we pushed him to take a stand. Make no mistake, it was just last year Rep. Robertson was on the record saying that ICE is unbelievably broken and disgraceful." Direct quote. Like most career politicians, Rep. Robertson simply shifted his stance once he knew he was facing a competitive challenger, but the voters of Tewksbury and Wilmington won't forget what he really thinks, end quote. Months later, in June, what is going on with these digital ads? After another third-party digital ad implied that Rep. Robertson supported driver's license for illegal immigrants, Robertson published a second op-ed denouncing the ad and pointing to an article back in 2018 during his first race where he stated his opposition to licenses for illegal immigrants. In the second op-ed, Robertson wrote, "Many supporters of mine called my office to make me aware of this ad. They were angered at the lies. They were shocked at the deliberate misinformation, as was I." This is my favorite part. "I tried to call this so-called organization. I couldn't reach them. The phone number listed on their website goes to a phone-based ad for Magic Jack and states that the subscription is not active. Who are these people? Who dedicates their time to spreading such untruths? This is a time for a community, for reaching out with an open hand, for working together for those who are most vulnerable. Now is not the time for pettiness, for shadowy ambush tactics." So the initial question is, and this will all make sense in a minute, how should Massachusetts lawmakers handle having approximately 275,000 illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants living in our state? And again, for the record, should these illegal or undocumented immigrants receive driver's licenses? So Rep. Robertson, you have 2 minutes.
Sure, I remember that. God, that was so long ago. And side note, you should consider doing drama on the radio. That was an excellent reading. Yeah, I laughed, especially in response to the article, because I don't know if this is considered conflict of interest for you, Robert, but that was from your Wilmington Apple question during my first race. That date of that article ran was July 4th, 2018. And I know this is your second state rep race, Alec, but I don't recall if you were in that one, so if my position predated you by 2 years, I don't know why it would be a reaction to your entry in the race. I made my comments clear. Having an illegal alien receive a driver's license creates confusion, and I know other states have it. You can look around the country, see places like Washington, D.C., where if these folks go across the border to Maryland or Virginia, the police there go, what the hell am I supposed to do about this? It also kind of makes things complicated for employers. Is this a valid ID to work? Is it not? Hopefully they're using the E-Verify system. But no, I'll never be for that. I made it clear multiple times. I also love the quote, it comes up every time, ICE is disgraceful and broken. That was days after we had learned that ICE had lost track of, if I recall, 65,000 kids. The full quote is, ICE losing children is disgraceful and is broken compared to what it was in the past. Because they were underfunded, they were using new tactics that had never been worked or tried before, and lost track to 65,000 people. Can you imagine if our police lost track of 6 prisoners? Would you not criticize them and go, what the hell are you guys doing? Keep track of these folks.
Watch your French, please.
Okay, pardon my French. But you get the point. Criticizing something is what a state rep's supposed to do. We're supposed to seek out how to make the system better, more efficient, and more accountable. If I'm gonna get kicked saying I support illegal aliens because I see ICE messing up and in a way it would make them better, it's a bit of hypocrisy. But as for that, we should be focusing on the legal immigrants, the folks here, the hundreds of thousands of folks that came to Massachusetts over these years, established roots, those who, unfortunately, earn a little bit less than your natives, but accomplish more and account for more of taxpayers. In fact, a legal immigrant is about half as likely to ever end up in the prison system as a person that's naturally born. Those are the folks that we should be supporting for. Those are the ones we should be putting our efforts behind.
All right, I thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. And Mr. DiFruscia, you now have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I am opposed to making to giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. I'm opposed to the sanctuary state, and I'm opposed to sanctuary cities. In Massachusetts, it creates confusion, and we're giving benefits to people who break the law, and at the same time, we're not giving the benefits, or we are making a less competitive environment for people who came here legally. We need to fight for the legal immigrants, and we need to make sure they have an environment in which they can thrive. And that starts by, not raising their taxes. But we cannot put law enforcement in a position, exactly like Mr. Robertson said, I think him and I agree here, where that we cannot give them driver's licenses, we cannot give them a sanctuary city. We cannot give them a sanctuary state, because we need to stand up for the law-abiding citizens and the immigrants who came here legally and give them a Massachusetts in which they can thrive. And we've seen it. We've had unequal economic development in this state. If you live inside 128, if you have a high-paying job, you benefit. You can afford Massachusetts. But if you work in the blue-collar job, or you work in a trade, or you're a police officer, or a nurse, or a teacher, you can't afford to live in these communities. And that's what we need to be focused on. We need to make our communities a better place for working families to live.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Follow-up question and time for rebuttal, if you so choose. But follow-up question, and the reason I've been asking about the negative campaigning is this question. So when the Lowell Sun earlier this year, Rep. Robertson referred to Mr. DiFruscia as an out-of-town candidate, even though Mr. DiFruscia is a lifelong resident. Last week, a prominent supporter of Rep. Robertson wrote a letter to the editor saying Mr. DiFruscia is, quote, negligent in attending the town of Tewksbury's town meetings and special town meetings, and he is negligent in voting at our local elections, special elections, state elections, and state primaries, unquote. But Mr. DiFruscia has actually voted 17 times since he turned 18. And so this is the 2020 race, not the 2018 race. And so the question is, given the 3 scenarios I just discussed, we all just discussed here, do you both pledge to run a positive campaign for the remaining 4+ weeks and disavow any misleading or untrue attacks made against your opponents by your supporters or by third-party organizations? And Mr. Robertson, you can go first there. 1 minute.
Yeah, I was running positive until they put my face in front of a burning police car despite supporting our first responders, despite claiming I voted for a gas tax, which I didn't. It's kind of sad. This is the type of DC divisiveness that has now made its way up. I'm kind of curious to also ask, I know you're going to address your voting record, what is the 17 out of? What percentage does that come from? And where were you in 2018? I know you say you're a lifelong resident. I know your family has roots here. So does mine. But the fact of the matter is I came back working in the private sector as an intern simultaneously for Rep. Mascot and dedicated. That's why folks know me. That's why when I go into the senior center, everyone brings up. That's why when they ran the ad saying Rep. Robertson supports illegal immigrants, the radical left, where's the rhetoric coming in this debate even? It's always positive. That's why I have friends everywhere. And I know it sounds cliche. When you drive home from the State House at the end of the day and you pass by someone and they wave to you, or you're in Market Basket and they come up and say, thanks for helping my son or daughter, just as when I was going door to door the other day, you get a handshake or a hug from a sweet old lady. It's the most rewarding part of this job. I love it. Absolutely, I'll disavow any sort of attack.
Thank you, Rep. Robertson. And so 1 minute to Mr. DiFruscia.
Sure. I've always run a positive race. That's why I've knocked on 5,500 doors. I'm talking to people every single day. I'm talking to voters. I'm hearing their stories. I'm hearing their problems. I will absolutely disavow misleading attacks against Mr. Robertson. And my campaign hasn't made any. As a matter of fact, I mean, Dave, you called me an out-of-town opponent. Our sisters run the same basketball team. I mean, right? And then we had a former town clerk of all people say that I didn't vote. As a matter of fact, Dave, come on, I know it's public record, but, I had to bring it.
I know.
I knew it was coming up. There it is. I know, we probably can't see it here on the town hall cameras, but I'll bring it up. There we, right there. So what, I missed a couple town meetings here and there. I was in college, no big deal. I will absolutely run a positive campaign. My campaign was positive from the beginning. It continues to be positive, and I'm going to continue to knock on doors, continue to talk to the working families of this district, and continue to fight for them.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. For the next 3 questions, I'm asking a lot of follow-up questions.
Sure.
This is question 4. Okay. For the next 3 questions, I'm going to talk a lot less, and we're going to focus on political ideology and core values, and we're going to cover some new ground. So the first response will come from Mr. DiFruscia, who will have 2 minutes, and then Rep. Robertson. Question 4 comes from Erica in Wilmington. Quote, with the recent passing of RBG and with reproductive rights now on the line, Massachusetts has the ability through the Roe Act to put the right of abortion into state law, expand access while also addressing racial disparities in maternal health, and provide for comprehensive sex education. Do you support the Roe Act, and where do you stand on the right to abortion care? Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes.
I am proudly the only pro-life candidate in this race. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and I respect and will defend the law of the land. However, when it comes time to the Roe Act, when it comes time to late-term abortion, when it comes time to infanticide, which is what the Roe Act does, it codifies infanticide here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I am absolutely opposed. I will always work against the late-term abortion. It is egregious. It is horrible. This bill is not. It is not about access to abortion. This bill is about killing babies born alive, and I will always stand against that. I am the only pro-life candidate in the race, and I will continue to fight for the right to life.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Representative Robertson, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not going to take all of them. I'm quite confused. It might give me some flack from those further along the left of the spectrum, but I am pro-life as well. Quite a grandiose claim, especially considering the letter I had submitted to the committee. One of the things when I was reviewing the Roe Act, and this was quite a contentious issue, in fact, it was one of the first ones, aside from sports gambling, the community reached out with more than just a handful or trickle of comments. It's not even so much, and Mr. DiFruscia brought up some important parts of it. One of the greatest concerns raised to me by a friend of mine at a place I volunteer here in town, but I'll leave her name out of it, was allowing folks under 18 years of age to go forward without their parental health care or their parental proxies to being part of that decision. Now, of course, there's rapes and unfortunately all sorts of other crimes that occur. But the fact of the matter is that the system accounts for that now, and this greatly increased what was underneath. And to me, that seemed invalid almost needless to say to an extent. I understand that folks say that this is her right to choose in the end, but if you're under 18 years old, it's as much as your parental decision. If you go in unfortunately with leukemia, even around that age, your parents are still involved with this decision. And abortion is a healthcare decision at the end of the day. So no, and indeed, you're not the only pro-life candidate in this. And I've had folks call, we've had great conversations, folks very much pro-choice, very much pro-life, but I told them at the end of the day, I am pro-life and I have opposed this matter.
I had a follow-up question, but I think I'd rather just give you both a 1 minute to respond. So, Mr. DiFruscia, did you have anything you wanted to respond?
Yeah. In 2018 Wilmington Apple questionnaire, Dave, you said you weren't sure if you said I'm neither pro-life nor pro-choice. This seems to be a bit of a transition from 2 years ago, again, facing a very strong Republican challenger who is the only pro-life candidate in the race. I've always been the only pro-life candidate in the race. And again, when it comes time to an election year, career politicians, the Beacon Hill machine, make decisions and say things that are politically expedient to protect themselves and protect their power.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Rep. Robertson, 1 minute.
Sure. The conversation about Roe was before you even reopened your OCPF account. And if you don't change your position as you learn things, you're not doing the job. The fact of the matter is that sometimes there are not easy choices out there. That sometimes, not necessarily in this case in my belief, but there might be great points from both sides on it. After the conversations I had with folks, the answer was no. It's pro-life. Absolutely. And growing up, sure, it was a contentious thing I remember over the years, but so was gay marriage at the time. And people have changed their minds as facts were presented to them. This was before you were in the race. The folks that called in, that had hours of discussion with, again, from those advocating and opposing Roe, was letting me to make my decision. I don't care if it was you in a one-on-one race, nor if it was the 9-on-1 race from the last time. At the end of the day, I'm gonna go forth and advocate what I believe is best for Tewksbury and Wilmington and listen and pay attention to their concerns. And that's exactly what I did here.
Great. Thank you, Rep. Robertson. I will ask a follow-up question, and if you have anything else on this topic, you can add it then. And this will be a 1 minute response. So Joe in Tewksbury would like to know if, speaking of health care and the Supreme Court, Joe in Tewksbury would like to know if Obamacare is rolled back by the Supreme Court, how would you protect Massachusetts residents with pre-existing conditions, and how would you help residents with their health care expenses, especially during a pandemic? So Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute.
Sure. I think number one, if we're going to help people and help them with their healthcare expenses, we're not going to raise their taxes. That's the most important. And of course, I will always support policies that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We need to work with private health insurance companies to ensure that there are tax incentives to cover folks with pre-existing conditions. In addition, if we have policies that spur job growth, people will be able to have private insurance through their employer. We have to get the economy moving. We have to get people back to work. That's how we'll ensure that people have the private insurance that they need, in addition to making sure that those with pre-existing conditions and those who need the help receive it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Rep. Robertson, 1 minute.
Sure. So the answer to inflating healthcare costs, which occur at faster than inflation, if the ACA is rolled back, is to get the economy reopening? That doesn't make much sense. Medicare, Medicaid expansion is the largest component of the Commonwealth's budget. If this is rolled back, it will undoubtedly leave people with pre-existing conditions exposed. And the problem is therefore the state can't run a deficit. We must maintain, we can issue debt vehicles, but we can't operate a deficit. We're constitutionally bound to have a balanced budget. The states have to either absorb that cost or those people are going to lose their coverage. It's one way or the other. The fact of the matter is everyone out there, regardless of the disability and challenges them, wants to go to work, but some of them just can't. I know this. They call my office all the time. We have issues with housing, even accessibility for public transportation, even just affording basic things like fixing the roofs over their head. I agree with you on a lot of things, and rolling back taxes is something that everyone looks to accomplish. But we got to do it in a way that doesn't leave these people literally sometimes potentially out in the cold because they have to make a choice on, am I going to pay for my cancer treatment? Because those are national decisions, or can I rely on the state to help me live another year? I'd rather see those people live another year, and I'm okay with a couple of dollars of my taxes going to make sure that my neighbor stays alive.
Thank you, Rep. Robertson. Mr. DiFruscia, if you so choose, I can give you 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, again, 16, 17% unemployment. The number one, the best provider for private health insurance is your employer. We need to get people back to work. That's the bottom line. 16% unemployment, and the State House has thrown their hands up and said, we can't roll back taxes. We can't do this. Spend, borrow, tax. That's all they want. That's their only agenda. I will fight to get our economy moving.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Rep. Robertson, 30 seconds, and do me a favor
You got
and
it.
don't refer to your opponent so we can move on after this.
That's fine. Absolutely. I paid close attention to it. You're right. The unemployment rate spiked to 17%. It's down to 9%. We halved it in the last month. It's a focus of mine. It's why I brought $150,000 to each town so that their economic development committees can hire outside consultants to vitalize our local economy. We're moving forward in Massachusetts right now. But as for the private insurance, absolutely. But there's some people that just cannot, unfortunately, work. They want to, but they cannot. And what do we do about them? How do we help them? Small businesses, as you know, as you're saying as a champion, and I'm sorry to break the rule there, they rely on the Affordable Care Act. I've had people call, say, hey, I'm on Mass Health, so I can operate my small business, and as one of my constituents called, can give my 12-year-old cancer medication treatment. That's why we need that system. And the best way to kind of slow the inflationary costs, we could simply just make the nonprofit for all the insurance companies there and remove the shareholder. We'd have a competitive market and bring down the costs simultaneously. We could bulk buy medication. There are plenty of alternatives there to just cutting it.
Great. Thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. And a little bit of a time imbalance.
Apologize.
I'll make sure Mr. DiFruscia gets a little bit more time at some point. So next up is question 5. This is going to go to Representative Robertson first, and then Mr. DiFruscia. You'll both have 2 minutes. Question number 5 comes from Nicole in Wilmington. As a Democrat, I'm very uncertain what the differences are between Dave Robertson and Alec DiFruscia on social issues. I was disheartened to see on multiple occasions Rep. Robertson's support for the Tewksbury Mascot, which many Native American groups have deemed racist since the 1960s. I wrote to Robertson regarding this issue and I did not get a response. Additionally, Robertson stated multiple times that he does not support sanctuary cities. How does he justify these and other stances to his constituents that consider themselves social justice Democrats? These and other issues are important to me, and I see no difference between the candidates, and therefore am considering abstaining from voting in this particular race. And so the question that I'm going to ask is, name the top 3 differences you see when comparing your platform to your opponent's platform.
Sure.
And Rep. Robertson, 2 minutes, you go first.
Sure. So I guess first comes first when it comes to the mascot issue, and I apologize. I mean, we get sometimes dozens of requests a day. I have a tracking system. In fact, it's accessible on my phone, my laptop, my office. And I pride myself on getting back through it. Perhaps, again, I apologize. I don't know if she wrote in the midst of a pandemic because we had, I'd say roughly, going off of the time that Jim and I worked in 2 years, about a year's worth of constituent cases come across in the span of about 2.5 months. So I apologize. I'll send her, make sure I give her a call. The mascot issue, I understand, is thorny, but I wore the uniform. I graduated from Tewksbury High, and we were told that as a symbol of our school and of our town and our community. And we had a discussion on the local level where this issue should be decided. The school committee held down the road in the auditorium, packed with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folks. I wasn't in office at the time, but they came to a decision, and it was settled. I understand that there's a bit of a mission on the state level to do so. I spoke against it because I don't feel that Tewksbury was using it in an offensive manner. And mind you, I'm not just saying that as an average white guy from Tewksbury, as some would say, maybe perhaps closer to Boston. For example, Mr. Lightfoot, who was over in the Greater Lowell Indian Affairs, and I believe they recast their name, came and spoke to it long before. They've invited folks from the Merrimack tribes, the Shawsheen tribe, those who were here before even the first British folks set foot on Plymouth Rock, to come in and talk about it. And his quote was, "I'd rather be remembered than forgotten." That's how I feel about that. But as for the 3 big issues, differences, 1, I'm absolutely in support of our public education. Public education from preschool to college is what put me here. And that's why I worked on the Student Opportunities Act, which will bring millions of dollars, not just for the district, but for each individual school. Support our special needs students and lift the local taxes down, or excuse me, I guess reduce the local taxes down that were covering special ed, and other funded mandates. I believe education is hugely important. Second, I believe in helping the towns develop senior housing, not just through the private markets, as Governor Baker and plenty of the Republicans have proposed, but also making sure that those who built their town have a place to go when they want to downsize in their twilight years. With those, they can enjoy the golden moments.
And Rep. Robertson, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
All right, I'll finish up the third
We're going
and
to hold
follow.
that thought for
Okay.
2 minutes, and we're going to let Mr. DiFruscia respond. And again, and I know I'm doing a terrible job at asking these questions, but the question was, and if you want to touch on sanctuary cities and the Mascot, you certainly can. The question is, name the top 3 differences you see when comparing your platform to your opponent's platform. 2 minutes, Mr. DiFruscia.
Sure. I'll start off by saying I support the Redmond moniker. I've always supported the Redmond moniker. Yes, Dave, we know you graduated from Tewksbury High. I didn't. I don't think that that's an issue. I support the moniker. I've always supported the moniker. As a matter of fact, I met a gentleman while I was out knocking doors who writes for the Somerville Times. And he told me that actually we first started using the red men and the Native American mascots shortly after World War I. As a matter of fact, during World War I, troops were using the red men profile on their uniforms. It was illegal at that time to have a patch on your uniform. And as they jumped out of the planes over Germany, they yelled Geronimo. These Native American mascots were put forth by the World War I generation, and these show our appreciation and our respect for our Native Americans who helped build the land that we're on and who helped build the society that we now have. In terms of our top 3 differences, I think number 1 is taxes. I will never, ever, ever vote for a tax increase. I can tell you that now, and I will stand by that as your next state representative. Number 2, I will always back the blue. I will not kowtow to the angry mob that is at the State House, that is looking to kneecap our police, that is looking to undermine our good law enforcement officers in the name of a politically driven agenda. And number 3, I won't be a part of the go-along to get along crowd at the State House. I want a government that will work for us, that will work for the taxpayers, that will work for the voters, and who will stand up to the poor leadership decisions being made and say no.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So 1-minute responses.
Yep.
Mr. Robertson, Representative Robertson, let's get back on track.
So I believe I was on my third one.
That's right.
So I believe I'm the one working for working families here. When you look at the groups that back me, or special interest groups, you'll notice a lot of the unions, those who go out, the blue-collar folks, the men and women that said a fair day's work is a fair day's wage. And sure, you can frame me approving a ballot question that lets all 48,000 folks in the 19th Middlesex District to go in and make their own decision as a tax increase, but it's not. If you go through and look at my voting record, you can't find a single time where I voted to raise a gas tax, an income tax, or a sales tax. But what I have done is made sure that those who live out here get compensated fairly, that they have schools and services that their kids can go to. And I don't believe that we, the members of Tewksbury and Wilmington, making modest salaries, should be the one to foot it. That's what I believe. I work for working families. I also want to say, again, for the folks watching this at home, who did the blue back? I didn't kowtow to any pressure. I stood up, I made my feelings clear, and the police know that, and that's why they're with me.
Great, thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. And Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute.
Sure. The voters of Massachusetts have rejected the graduated income tax 6 times. Mr. Robertson is just going back on what the voters have said for 6 times over the last 50 years by advancing the graduated income tax. That is a tax that will hit small businesses. That is a tax that will trickle down to the middle class. It is trickle-down taxation at its finest, and it will hurt our communities and it will hurt our working families. He says he'll never vote for an income tax, for the graduated income tax. He has. He says he's never voted for a tax increase. The TCI gas bill, again, the legislature throws up their hands and says it's a marketplace-based compliance mechanism. Again, it's a fun way, a politician's way of saying gas tax, and not only is it a gas tax, but it cedes the power of the legislature to tax to unelected bureaucrats. As your next state representative, I will fight for you, I will fight for your family, and I will make sure that you have good representation at the State House.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So we're going to move on to question number 6, and this is the last question that deals with sort of political ideology. Yesterday, the Massachusetts Republican Party ran a digital Facebook ad against Rep. Robertson. It read, State Rep. David Robertson proudly endorses the most extreme radical Democrat in the U.S. Senate, Ed Markey. Senator Markey is anti-police, and he endorses defunding and disarming law enforcement. Markey supports violent mobs that are burning and looting American cities, close quote. So question 6 is inspired by Eileen from Wilmington, who found the logic of this ad interesting, tying a state rep candidate to someone they support at the federal level, and then ascribing that federal candidate's positions to the state rep candidate. So Eileen would like to know, this is Alec, this is Mr. DiFruscia first, 2 minutes, and then Representative Robertson, 2 minutes. Eileen would like to know, who are you voting for president? President Trump or former Vice President Biden? Why? And do you have any misgivings about your vote? So, Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes.
I support President Trump. I'll be voting for him in November. I do not have any misgivings about my vote. But this race, as I would say to Eileen, and as I've said to voters all across this district, I am not worried about the President of the United States. I'm worried about Tewksbury and Wilmington. Families are hurting. They feel left behind by the State House. They're raising our taxes, they're kneecapping our police, and I will put an end to that. I will stand up for our police. I will always, always back the blue. I will never vote for a tax increase. I want to make sure that working families can keep more money in their pocket to make the decisions that they need that are best for their family. I will stand up for small businesses, and I will fight for policies that make our towns an incubator of innovation. We want to attract small businesses here to Tewksbury and Wilmington, and that starts with business-friendly policies. We need to make sure that these are the types of things we attract to our towns, and we need to make sure that our families have access to the jobs and the resources they need to raise their families and survive.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So Rep. Robertson, 2 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's a bit of the disavowal of the attack ads that we both pledged to before, because that's interesting. When asked when I was going to vote for Markey or Kennedy, and quite literally, you can see this when I was literally ambushed by a literal communist following the nonpartisan police movement over in Wilmington. She goes, "Are you with Markey or Kennedy?" And I told the story of when the senator himself called back. And I said, here's all the things I disagree with him on. Gun control, for example, because I'm Gun Owners Action League endorsed. I spent much time with the Boy Scouts around firearms. I know the sensible stuff that works. I disagree with him on X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be federally. And I made it clear why. I said, the senator, whether I agree with him or not on everything is not true, but I at least know him. And he gave me a call back on a minuscule constituent issue. And that spoke to me. I might agree with him on everything, but I do know his heart's in the right place, at least when it comes to this. He believes he's doing the right thing. And I never got a call from Kennedy. He never reached out. So why would I go with the guy I don't know a damn thing about? That side, I will be voting for Vice President Biden. I think everyone at home knows how this goes. I give to Trump a couple things that I thought that he was going to do well on. The trade imbalance with China, for example. I'm an economist by trading. I wouldn't have done the tariffs. I would have found a way, for example, if I was President Trump, to fix the currency imbalance out there. I was excited. I thought he was going to go through with this huge infrastructure program, especially with the issues of Route 38 and 93 and the MBTA. The Green Line extension, he could have a home run in Massachusetts. The state that perhaps, I think after, we might have opposed him the most. I don't know if Vermont beat us or not, but he could have had a major win. We never got the infrastructure project. So, I did my consideration. I said there were promises that didn't come through, and I'll be going with Mr. Biden this round.
Great. Thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute response. Anything you want us to add?
Sure. Ed Markey has called to defund and disarm the police. That is the issue of this race. We have leftists at the State House and federally undermining police officers. When you undermine good police officers, you're only left with bad ones. I've spoken to hundreds of police officers on the campaign trail, and they all say the same thing. This is the hateful, nasty rhetoric that needs to be pushed back against. This is the hateful rhetoric that needs to be stood up to. I will do that. I am the Back the Blue candidate.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. And Rep. Robertson, 1 minute response.
Again, who did the police endorse? We were just talking about disavowing rhetoric. I voted against it. The most powerful tool, again, as I said earlier in this debate, is your vote. I sent 4 pages including a detailed case example from Tewksbury and from Wilmington on why our department should be modeled after and pursued. But surely, you disagree with some things within the Republicans, as I do with the Democrats. That is our job. And despite what you're saying, attempting to tie one party together, I am, by both parties, one of the most independent people when it comes to voting in the State House across this entire first term, at 83%. There was nobody who fought harder for our police at Tewksbury and Wilmington than I did over those many hours between the speakers, our chiefs, their patrolmen, their support staff, their dispatchers, and their unions. And I will happily do so again as I continue my career.
Mr. DiFruscia, if you so choose, 30-second rebuttal.
Sure. Again, I am the back the blue candidate. I will always stand up for our police. The narrative that is being pushed by our friends in the media and by our friends nationally and at the State House is an awful, awful narrative. It kneecaps our police, and I will always 100% stand behind them because I proudly back the blue.
So Rep. Robertson, I owed Mr. DiFruscia 30 seconds. Are we okay
Yes,
to
please.
move on? And he meant the national media, by the way. He didn't mean the local media.
Absolutely. Yes, Robert, I knew you knew what I was talking about.
We know. All right, so for the final three questions, we're going to focus on local issues affecting Wilmington and Tewksbury. And frankly, I wish the entire debate was focused on that, but here we are. So question number 7, Rep. Robertson, 2 minutes, and then Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes. Let's talk about the local economic recovery during COVID-19.
Sure.
Ruth in Tewksbury would like to know, if elected, what would you do to help Route 38 small businesses keep their doors open?
Sure. Well, that's a heck of a complex question. I think the first thing that comes first was, what did I do during COVID-19? Now, we've heard this number, 17%, come up a number of times now. I'm telling you, just as a few days ago, it's about roughly 9%, high 9. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think in Tewksbury it's 10.2, but we continue adjusting them downwards. They do a monthly look back and equate to the real numbers as solid data comes in. So we already have unemployment, so moving forward. And I advocated for businesses, especially during the COVID crisis, their Paycheck Protection Program. The banks ignored small businesses across the board. But I called the vice presidents from everyone from Bank of America to Jean d'Arc to fight for them and to make sure that they got the loans and that they understood how to get those loans forgiven from our federal government to keep their doors open, or at least their payroll active for this. Going forward, I've already begun working. As I said, I got $150,000 earmarked specifically for the towns themselves to do so. And I've had a long-term vision as well. It's why I'm pushing so hard on Route 38. Route 38 is the number one reason cited in both towns why shoppers don't go. In fact, Wilmington's economic report, it was universal. People go, I don't want to deal with the traffic there. It's easier to order something online and wait for me than deal with the Route 38 traffic. It's why I already got the state to start replanning things. Amongst that as well, I signed on immediately when it came to forgive restaurants from their meals tax. Angelo Sciascia proposed this, I think, day 3 of the pandemic, for the state to waive that entirely. The entire time the state would forgo that because we have $3.5 billion in our stabilization budget. We could eat that cost, which I also want to, it's not business related, but I want to bring up that we're level funding the towns and schools as well because we're expecting a revenue downturn there. Going forward, I believe there's a few different things. One of the interesting things that Canada did, for example, and this is a huge problem when it comes to landlords, is they created provincial-backed loans. Now, it would ask occupants, commercial or residential, only to pay 25%. The states paid 25% of the average monthly rent, and then the federal government gave a loan for 50%, just like the PPP would be forgiven. There's creative ideas out there. I could spend 20 minutes on this, but I know we're limited in time, so.
Yes, thank you, Rep. Robertson. And so Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes.
Sure. I think number one, we all know it. The number one way to get businesses back to Tewksbury and Wilmington is to fix 38. Businesses don't want to come here. We see the empty buildings. We see the empty lots. And my priority as your next state representative will be to work with our local officials to make sure we can secure the funding to pave 38 and to show the state that they will get an ROI on their investment here in Tewksbury and Wilmington. It won't take much. Expand a few intersections as we move down from Lowell to to Woburn and get traffic flowing, get it moving, and allow businesses to prosper along 38. And number two, I will not vote for a tax hike. That's a gas tax hike, that's an income tax hike, that's a sales tax hike, you name it. We need to create an environment that encourages small businesses, that makes them want to come here, because we've seen such uneven economic development across the state. If you live it within 128, it's a completely different economy than the economy that exists out here in Tewksbury and Wilmington. That will be my priority, is to make sure we have balanced economic growth, bring businesses back to Tewksbury and Wilmington, and make sure their tax burdens are low so that they want to come here, that they will put roots down here and attract the businesses that we need.
Great. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and then we can incorporate any responses we had into these next several follow-up questions. So follow-up question to Rep. Robertson first for a minute. There's also an effort underway to make Route 38 and major offshoots more walkable for pedestrians. Tewksbury, for example, is looking to install a sidewalk on Shawsheen Street from East Street to Main Street, Route 38. The project will cost $800,000 and is coming before town meeting next week. At this week's Selectmen's meeting, Chairman Jay Kelly instructed Town Manager Richard Montori to ask Tewksbury's state delegation to file legislation to allow Community Preservation Committee, CPC funds, to be spent on sidewalk projects. His thinking is, walking, jogging, running, biking, skating are forms of recreation that take place on sidewalks. So would you file and support such legislation? And bigger picture, do you see yourself working well with the town managers, boards of selectmen, and other officials from both communities? Rep. Robertson, 1 minute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. First off, I know I watched that. I think Mr. Kelly's idea is fantastic, because CPA can already be used for open space and recreation, so we have a precedent there. Without question, yes, sidewalks have been difficult. It's something I've attempted to earmark in a number of budgets here. And when I spoke to our town managers, I spoke to our Board of Selectmen and said, here's what we're gunning for, and prioritize them. We always went for things like intersection funding, because those are heavy lifts. For example, I can tell you right here, $500,000 for this intersection, which is going to be impacted by our new fire station and school. $400,000 for the unincorporated road program. I think there's 26.3, just about one marathon's worth of unincorporated roads in Wilmington. And that's to help, as I know, as a state representative, to help the towns with the 25% design phase, which is typically the largest hurdle when it comes to improving. When a town goes through and applies for eventually what is the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Plan, in collaboration with NMCOG, or the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, the biggest hurdle is that they themselves fund the design phase. I know that. It's from my years of experience. It's why I've consulted with NMCOG, with Rich Montori and Jeff Hall, gotten the rough estimates, and put that into bond issuances for transportation issues in order to alleviate that.
Great. Thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. And Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute.
Yes, absolutely. I will work on building sidewalks and making our Route 38 from Livingston to Maine more walkable. In terms of working with local officials, I will be able to work with them because I've knocked on their doors. I've spoken to them one-on-one, firsthand. I know the issues of these towns, and I am always open to a dialogue and a discussion, and I will work with them each day with them in mind to make sure our communities get the funding and the infrastructure that they need to make them thrive.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. So another follow-up question, 1 minute. Rep. Robertson first. Wilmington has the 18th highest commercial tax rate in the state. Tewksbury has the 33rd highest. This question is from John in Wilmington. Many of our business owners feel this hurts existing businesses and drives away potential businesses. These tax rates are set by the Board of Selectmen upon the recommendation of the town assessor and town manager. Do you agree the commercial tax rates are too high in Wilmington and Tewksbury? And if so, will you lobby town leadership to adjust them? Rep. Robertson, 1 minute.
Well, excuse me, I'm glad the question addresses the local leadership, because that imbalance is because of the tax shift, which your select boards do to ensure that residents have livability. Their philosophy is that it's hard enough around here with the restricted housing stock, inflating valuations on homes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If your investment as your house is rising in value, that's a positive and reflects typically good local government services. But what have I done to combat that? Because you can lobby it, but at the end of the day, it's the decision of 5 independent local folks who want to balance taxes and good local services, like ensuring potholes are filled in and teachers have textbooks that don't have Gorbachev as the last Russian leader. I brought back record number of aid. We passed the Student Opportunities Act. Again, literal millions of dollars coming into this town. And in fact, just up the street here, and unfortunately the viewers at home can't see it, we're breaking ground in the Tewksbury Combined Elementary School project for 3rd and 4th grade. I, with the state delegation, brought back $32 million. Per resident, a little over $1,000. That's not per taxpayer, that's per resident. I will always fight to bring state aid back, which will keep your property taxes low. On top of that as well, I filed legislation to help our veterans and increase their tax deduction on their line item. Sorry, Robert, I know. I have a lot to say.
Understood. Thank you very much, State Rep Robertson. So, Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute.
Yes, I will lobby to get the commercial tax rate lowered. At the beginning of this pandemic, when the government came in and shut down our small businesses, we could see serious budget shortfalls, especially in Wilmington, when these businesses aren't operating and can't pay their tax bills. As your next state representative, I will always fight for policies that encourage business and that bring businesses to Tewksbury and Wilmington, and that includes lobbying to bring that commercial tax rate down. In addition to the local aid, Mr. Robertson has brought back year over year aid, Chapter 70 money to our schools has actually gone down in real dollars. So yes, he's bringing back local aid, but it's actually decreased. In addition, last year, the Boston Herald reported that we have almost $2 billion of our $40 billion state budget that goes towards services and welfare for illegal immigrants. We need to cut out that waste and that abuse of the system and bring that money back to Tewksbury and Wilmington.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Since you mentioned Rep Robertson, I'll give you 1 minute to respond.
Sure. The education aid was true before I took office. The Student Opportunities Act adjusts for that and the unfunded mandates. And I know we agree on the illegal immigration. I saw the number from a more, quite literally political conservative estimate at $1.25 billion, which seems rough. But I want the folks at home to understand that a lot of these things are the state reimbursing for emergency room costs and education. We monitor for fraud for illegal immigrants quite strictly. And I will always support that. It makes sense to. But as for what the federal government's doing about illegal immigration, that's a football that I can't get on the field and tackle over. The fact of the matter is that we need to do everything to discourage illegal immigrants, encourage legal immigration, and in the meantime, not punish a kid who is 6 years old. We need to prevent that from happening to begin with.
Great. Thank you very much, Rep Robertson. Mr. DiFruscia, 1 minute response if you so choose.
I will never, ever vote for a tax increase. I want to bring businesses back to Tewksbury and Wilmington. I will lobby to bring the commercial tax rate down, and I will ensure that our towns and communities have the local aid that they need to fund these critical projects.
Great. Thank you very much. Question 8 will focus on Wilmington specifically. Question 9 will focus on Tewksbury specifically. Question 8 will go to Mr. DiFruscia first, and then Rep Robertson, and it'll be a 2-minute question, a 2-minute answer. So question 8, Wilmington voters are going to be facing some difficult decisions as it has more than $143 million in capital needs, according to its recent facility master plan study. A few months ago, voters supported feasibility study designs for a new town hall school administration building, which eventually is expected to cost approximately $29 million, and a new senior center, which is estimated to cost eventually possibly $12 million. A fire and police substation in North Wilmington is also being eyed, estimated to cost at $8 million. And last night, hybrid learning was delayed again in Wilmington until late October, in part because of potential air quality issues with some of the schools. Earlier this year, the Selectmen and School Committee in Wilmington submitted statements of interest to the Mass School Building Authority's construction reimbursement program for 6 of its schools, with the Wildwood Early Childhood Center in dire need of replacement. Wilmington voters are realistically, and this is not hyperbole, Wilmington voters are realistically looking at 5 to 6 building projects in the next 10 to 12 years. Something is going to have to give. Which building projects should town officials and taxpayers prioritize? Why? And how will you help the town maximize any available state funding? So, Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes is yours.
I think number one, we need to prioritize the schools, and number two, we need to prioritize the fire substation in North Wilmington. No doubt about it, and those will be my priority. That's money that we can get back in local aid. Again, we have $2 billion that is spent in the $40 billion state budget that goes to funding services for illegal immigration. We need to weed out that waste, fraud, and abuse. But, we need to look at what's going on right now. The state legislature has yet to pass a budget. We need to give our cities and towns more certainty when it comes time to what's actually going on at the State House. Never in the last 20 plus years have we extended past the July 31st deadline to pass a budget. What's going on? Career politicians are more of the same. They put their hands up, they pass these temporary budgets and say, I don't know. That's what we need at the State House. We need someone who will stand up, who will get the budget passed to make sure our cities and our towns have the security that they need to build these projects. I will prioritize education. I will prioritize public safety. And those are the two things that I will fight for. I will work with the towns to make sure we work on their plans to get the funding that they need. But number one, we need to pass a state budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. And so, Mr. Robertson, if you want, you can have a 1-minute response.
Please, what's going on? It's COVID. And the federal government...
Oh, I apologize.
2 minutes.
2-minute response.
That's okay. It's COVID. It was us waiting to see what the federal delegation would bring back in terms of state aid. Because while we wisely saved $3.5 billion, thanks to the bipartisan nature of the governor's budget and the state delegation's budget, we wanted to make sure that we could keep some money in the bank that the federal government said they could. And they tossed trillions of dollars on the pile for a tax break just a little while ago. Better or worse is yet to be seen. But then COVID breaks out. And we said, we're going to have to see what we can do, because thankfully we saved up $3.5 billion. But again, if the federal government's going to step in and pick up some of these costs, we're going to put out a budget and pass it that minimizes the taxpayer impact here in Massachusetts. As for the priorities, this is where local experience pays off. My two priorities are the senior center and fire station. One, I'm the only candidate that's been through the school building process, and you can see quite successful, brought back the maximum reimbursement for the town of Tewksbury, something I'm ready to do for Wilmington in the coming years. But if you knew where they are in the MSBA process, and it was a few years between where we stand and when the shovel goes in the ground and when we're going to be lobbying for reimbursement. Two, the fire station site is still yet to be considered, and one of the sites has an Article 97 restriction, which is an open space preservation. It was something discovered by the town of Wilmington in the process of consideration. It requires an act of the legislature, and not just an act, but a supermajority in which the governor is automatically told to reject it by the Department of Environmental Protection, and that's where my experience comes in. So first things first, the senior center is overtaxed and overused, but we have consideration right now. It's a wonderful place. I love Terry. I love seeing my friends there. Before the COVID outbreak, when it was still open, I held office hours and I go over there and volunteer with some of the distributions just to be available to our seniors. They desperately need a place. They built Wilmington, and right now they're sitting outside in the field because they don't have a hall large enough to be in. We can get that project underway almost immediately with some of the free cash, as some of our former selectmen friends in Wilmington have mentioned, with some state resources that I've earmarked in bipartisan collaboration with Senator Tarr. And then we can hit the ground running with the Article 97 removal on that land so the fire station can be built. But until we have a spot, how are we going to build a fire station?
Thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask my follow-up questions. I had really good Wilmington follow-up questions, but I will afford Mr. DiFruscia and Mr. Robertson 1-minute responses if they so choose. Did you want to add anything, Mr. DiFruscia?
Sure. There's an old Mike Tyson quote. Everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face. Guess what? The coronavirus was a punch in the face. And for the state legislature to sit by and be one of only 4 or 5 in the country to not pass a budget, to leave our cities and towns hanging by a thread because they can't get their act together is no way to govern. We need to make sure that we get the state budget passed. We need to make sure that we get the maximum amount of local aid back to our cities and towns so we can fund these projects. The bottom line is Beacon Hill is broken. It's run by career politicians and special interests and who refuse to sit down and do their job.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. Rep. Robertson, 1 minute.
You're right, it was a punch in the face. And we were so well prepared that we fully funded our education and unrestricted general government aid for our $3.5 billion. But again, as for the rest, Why are we going to pass up on potential federal aid? Doesn't make any sense to forego something that the federal government through a debt vehicle might issue that, again, will minimize the impact of everyone here on Main Street, on Pleasant Street, over on Church and Federal Street in Wilmington. It makes no sense to rush something along, say we have a deadline, when the federal government's telling us, hold tight, and these are from our federal delegation, there might be some help along the way. You saw the debates, everyone saw the debates. No matter if you chose Fox, CNN, MSNBC, there was discussion of a second federal stimulus package. Why would we not wait to see what that comes down and make the right choice and carefully plan? In the state government, you don't shoot from the hip and just make promises. You have to put a plan behind what you're going to have to say, and this is absolutely what the state's doing.
Great. Thank you very much, Rep. Robertson. We're going to move on to the ninth and final question of the evening. This question will focus on Tewksbury. State Rep. Robertson will answer first. Mr. DiFruscia will answer second. 2 minutes each. Aside from coyotes, fireworks, water main breaks, and potholes, the biggest complaint I hear from Tewksbury residents online is overdevelopment. Too many apartments, too many condos, some say even too many homes. Residents worry about their quality of life and feel Tewksbury is becoming less like the town they grew up in and more like a city. George in Tewksbury has a question about the governor's housing choice bill. He would like to know where the candidates stand on the part of the bill where at town meeting, a zoning change would go from 2/3 to a simple majority. George says, to me, the builders already have enough, if not too many, tools in their toolbox. Handing them another is the last thing our district needs. So what are your specific thoughts on that proposal? And in general, what can you do to help Tewksbury continue to progress in many areas, yet retain some of its small town feel? And Rep. Robertson, 2 minutes, you're up first.
So for those that may not be familiar with the governor's housing choice bill, essentially what it allows is a town meeting to roll back from a supermajority vote to a simple majority vote. And because of that, I'm not a fan of it. Now, I typically very much approve of the governor. I think for the most part, he does a level-headed, fair job, and I give him kudos across many things. I've spoken about my subtractions of him before. But like it or not, Tewksbury is going to see some 40B development after this coming decennial census. We're going to be below. So as 2 years ago, when I was running, I explained to folks there's a few things we can do. One, I attempted to bring $500,000 to either purchase, plan, develop, expand, or renovate our current public housing stock with an emphasis on local priorities for local elderly, local veterans, and local families in order to meet that cost. I've worked with a number of folks with our local housing board and our housing partnership to talk about the millions of dollars that Tewksbury has in its Affordable Housing Trust Fund and how to leverage those through grants with the state and federal application. And in fact, Congressman Moulton endorsed me today partly because I dogged him and his staff so often to get grants, pass-through grants specifically, which is a grant the federal government gives to the state to reimburse or disperse to a community in order to improve that. Because Tewksbury has opportunity right there at the state hospital. And I've worked with the state hospital. I've been working with the state hospital to get land transferred to the cemetery. And again, I think we can address some of that public housing shortfall off of Livingston Street and continue to grow and create that community where there's family, veteran, and senior housing that isn't a 6-story condo shoved in on the corner of some random side street where some poor guy 10 years ago bought a half-acre house so his kid can run along. It breaks my heart. It's definitely a different town than I grew up in.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative Robertson. So, Mr. DiFruscia, 2 minutes is yours.
I'm opposed to the proposal by the governor to change that threshold from 2/3 to a simple majority. Our towns need to have a say in what's built. And that's the bottom line for me. Yes, after the census, we will see our 40B number decline, and we need to find ways to do that. I think one way is to ensure that we have that housing stock by working with local officials to increase the local aid to build affordable housing for seniors, for families, for people who need it. We need to keep people from Tewksbury in Tewksbury, and we cannot allow developers well-connected developers, to build housing projects by circumventing the town process, which is exactly what can happen once 40B, once we are discovered to be under or we are counted to be under the 40B threshold. And that is exactly what I am focused on working with. I want to make sure we can keep Tewksburyans, I'm not quite sure what the word is, I want to make sure we can keep red men in Tewksbury, and that will always be a priority as your next state representative.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. I heard great answers, but not too many disagreements, so I think we're going to move on into closing statements. And again, that coin flip right before we went to air determined that Mr. DiFruscia is going to give his closing statement first. He'll have 3 minutes, and then Rep. Robertson will have 3 minutes to close as well. So Mr. DiFruscia, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Dave. It's been a lot of fun. My name is Alec DiFruscia, and I am the Republican candidate for state rep here in Tewksbury and Wilmington. I've seen what's going on at the State House. We have career politicians who can't pass a state budget and throw their hands up and say, it's not our job, we may get money from the federal government. I've seen what goes on at Beacon Hill. They operate behind closed doors, and they do not hold themselves accountable to the taxpayers. That's what I will bring as your next state representative. I will fight every day to make sure government is held accountable to us. I will fight to make sure that we have access to our government and to make sure that you have representation that represents your values at the State House. I will always back the blue. I will stand up to the hateful rhetoric being pushed by the national media and some politicians at the State House. I will never vote for a tax increase, and I will certainly never vote for a tax increase that gives that taxing power to unelected bureaucrats. I'm opposed to the graduated income tax, and I want to make our towns a place for businesses to thrive. We need to bring more business and better businesses back to Tewksbury and Wilmington. We need to get our kids back in school. We need to get our businesses open, and I will be your fighter. You've seen me in your neighborhoods. You've seen me knocking on your doors. I will continue to do it for the next 4 weeks of this campaign. I am working hard now, and once elected, I will work hard then. My name is Alec DiFruscia, and I ask for your vote on November 3rd.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. DiFruscia. And Representative Robertson, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. You've heard a lot through this debate. I hope it's answered any questions that you at home might have had. And I hope it has allowed you to see the absolute incredible importance that perhaps the most local office in government, the state representative, has on you. Understanding state funding, understanding who to call when you don't get your unemployment or your father loses his handicap placard and you reach out to your state rep is critical. So is securing school funding. So is bringing back records amount of local aid, as I have done the last 2 years. So is supporting nonprofits as a Strong Water Farm, or voting against the gas tax and then bringing back $1.7 million in bond earmarks for when they're sold to fix our local roads. I've done that with pride. I've committed myself to you, and you put your trust in me last election, knowing that our shared beliefs and our shared commitments for a better future can be done together through collaboration, constructive debate, and some healthy criticism from time to time. I'm absolutely proud to call Tewksbury and Wilmington my home, the place where I grew up, the place which made me today. And the reason I ask for your vote November 3rd is that you know who's going to the State House. You can call me a career politician because I interned free of charge for a few years while simultaneously working, while going to school, bettering myself. Because there's 2 types of paychecks in this world. There's one you can bring to the bank and there's one that you can cash up here. And that's why I stuck with Representative Mascot and learned the importance of constituent services, paying attention to local issues, and believing in a better future. That's why the police have endorsed me. It's why the fire have endorsed me. It's why the nurses called the other day. We had a healthy conversation, I hope, knock on wood, to secure their endorsements. Because when the world was burning down during COVID, and some folks were criticizing and calling things to reopen, but they didn't even have enough masks at the state hospital, there was only one state rep from the 19th Middlesex district who was making calls in the bipartisan fashion with the governor's staff, with Senator Tarr's staff, with Senator Feingold's staff, literally around the world to make sure that we had everything we need. Over the next 2 years, I will continue to give my heart and soul and fight for you each and every day as I have done for the last 2 years. Call that professional, call that career, fine by me, but I call it pride.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Representative Robertson. And that'll do it. So I would like to thank our candidates, Representative Dave Robertson and Challenger Alec DiFruscia, for a great debate. I'd like to thank Brian and Jason from Tewksbury Telemedia and Ryan, Adam, and the team over at WCTV. I'd like to thank Lizzie, our timekeeper, and Lorna, our organizer. Folks, please don't forget to vote. Whether you vote by mail, vote early in person, or vote on Election Day on November 3rd, please vote. And thank you all so much for watching tonight. Have a great night.